And that is fascism. What we're seeing is fascism, massive censorship, all these government agencies going after the American people. And the main problem they have, it's not just patriotism, it's that we're Christians, and Christians with the Second Amendment. I mean, they are so scared. You know, it's not a sign of confidence or security that they're doing that. They're doing it out of fear. They're attacking President Trump out of fear. And that's how evil is. Evil is cowardly, just like Hamas killing all these defenseless people, babies, children, and then right away they start calling for a ceasefire. That's how the devil operates, because in essence, evil is cowardly, and the devil is a coward.
But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. He is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongful.
Well, I'm in a rock and roll band, and we were headed for the top, babe. Way back in 91, some wrecky business scumbags took it from us. Well, they forgot my gun. Well, now we're back in business, folks. Now come to claim what's mine.
And to those who would try to oppose socialism on the United States, we again deliver a very simple message. America will never be a socialist country.
Hey, it's me, and welcome to this video. Now, the world is a mess, as you know. If the USA doesn't have a real president, then the world goes to hell. And we're God's nation on earth. So if we don't have a God-fearing Christian in office, who is also a strong person, then the devil goes on a rampage around the world. But it's even worse than that. You know, the Biden regime is really acting like the Antichrist, meaning they're arming and financing all kinds of terror groups and causing chaos and war where it's not even necessary. Diplomacy isn't even cared about, and they don't care about the law. They're going after American patriots. They're opening the border, and it's all about creating refugee streams and mixing up populations. And you really wonder, is there anything like a common denominator, a common thread that you can see? And of course, I'm here to tell you that, of course, yeah, there is. And it's a fight, a rebellion, if you will, a revolt against God. And I don't say that because I'm Christian or I put my belief and the respect I have for the higher authority as a guide for me to say these things. I'm looking at it from a logical, common sense perspective. Obviously, I have my religious views, but if you look at it in a reasonable way, it's very easy to make an argument that what we're seeing here is a rebellion against God and God's world. And I say that because the policies that many of these people are embracing are anti-God. And we're talking about playing with science. We're talking about Frankenstein experiments, mass abortions, and the list goes on and on. It never really stops, right? Because these people are playing God because they don't respect God. And what do you have with totalitarians who want complete power? Well, they will not tolerate that people have higher authority, which is God. And so they are attacking Christians. They're attacking the very entity that is God because they want complete power. Now, we're God's nation on earth. Why is it that there are so many people inside of our nation that want to end the republic? Well, for starters, they never really accepted that we created the USA getting away from the English, who were dominating colonies, which is kind of similar, if you think about it, to Israel. You, again, had the British there, and they called that whole region Palestine, that Jewish people, Arabs, living together, right? And suddenly they created Israel. And it's a Jewish state, and we are God's nation on earth, so you can understand where people really have an identical hatred of our nation that they have for Israel. In both cases, countries that were created and the neighbors didn't like it, or the British didn't like it, or at that time the English. And if you look at the Ukraine conflict, we're arming and financing a regime that has ultra-nationalists, okay, I'm going to say it, National Socialists, in their armed forces. Why are we doing that? But think of it this way. When communism and the Soviet Union died, what you have left is Russia. It's a Christian nation. Ukraine, being part of Russia, is Christian. So we're talking about a very large population of Christian people. And so if you finance and arm Ukraine to fight against Russia, and you always hear these people saying, well, they're killing Russians, that's good. The Russophobia, right? Is it really Russophobia? Or is it phobia against Christians? Or is it that they're financing and arming Ukraine to attack and kill Russians, knowing also that the ratio is 9-1, 9 Ukrainians will die in an attempt to kill 1 Russian? And so, isn't it so, if you use logic, that the Biden regime is arming and financing Ukraine to kill Ukrainians and Russians, being that they're all Christians, and that way you reduce the Christian population, like they want Ukrainians and Russians to die, both, and to destroy Ukraine and to hurt Russia as much as possible. And when you look at Israel, it's very clear the Biden regime, and before that the Obama regime, were financing Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. In fact, the Biden regime right away took the Houthis off the list of terrorists, and they now declared war on Israel. It's not a surprise. But what we're talking about is Biden even going to Israel, and while he's there, in their faces, announces $100 million for Hamas. You could say, oh, it's for Palestine. No. Palestine is controlled by Hamas. All the money that goes in there goes straight to Hamas. And so we're talking about giving some kind of a reward for what just happened. And if you look at the media, they're all pro-Palestine. They didn't really feel outraged about the killings of like 1,400 civilians in Israel. But now, if you have some reaction and a special operation, every day it's like, oh, kids died, and oh, we need a ceasefire, right? And when the Ukraine regime was bombing the Donbass, at that time, people in the Donbass were still Ukrainians, right? But many of them were ethnic Russians. Many of them, of course, speak Russian. And lots of civilians were murdered, burned alive for years. And they said nothing. Where was the international media, right? They were silent. And now every time Ukraine misfires and they hit their own civilians, it's like, oh, look what Russia did. And war crimes, right? Every time Russia is winning battles, they're like, war crimes. And when Israel reacts to the evil that they experienced, it's like war crimes. Israel is committing war crimes. So isn't it interesting, right, how the media sides with perpetrators of evil? They look away, but then when Russia or Israel react, then, oh, war crimes, right? And it's evil. But who's really evil in this equation? Now, we don't want to see any civilians die. That's why I think it's Antichrist to cause chaos, war, because you're killing a lot of civilians. You're creating refugees, and it's disgusting, right? It should be clear to anyone with a brain that Russia and Israel were provoked on purpose, and they both conducted a special operation as a reaction. They're justified, in my opinion. And if they're harsh, if they're tough, so be it. Action equals reaction. Now, Russia has been pretty patient, and that is because they see Ukrainians as their brothers. They see them as Russians. So eventually, Ukraine will be part of Russia, especially the half of Ukraine that is Russian-speaking. And so they went out of their way not to be too brutal, because Russia is the most powerful army in the world right now, according to U.S. News and World Report. And we're number 2. China's number 3, by the way. And Russia's number 1 because they're ahead with hypersonics, the missiles they have, the nukes, but also the experience, right? The combat experience. They have decimated the Ukraine armed forces. Don't believe the hype of the Ukraine Defense Ministry or the British government or the Pentagon even. They're all telling fairy tales. Videos on YouTube, all fairy tales. The Ukraine armed forces have been decimated, and the Ukraine regime lost, and that's why they quickly started another conflict with Israel, hoping that people would be more interested, but also tying Israel to the conflict in Ukraine, of course, to get more money, to print more money, and to keep war and chaos going. And a lot of it is about distraction. Like it was with the Bush family starting up wars. Suddenly you have a Patriot Act. Suddenly you have FISA modifications. You have the creation of DHS, Department of Homeland Security. But they're not even doing that. If you really look at what they're doing now, they hired pro-Hamas people, pro-Iran people. That was exposed last week. They assist people in invading our nation across the border. They're doing nothing. They had UCs undercovers on January the 6th. They're going after patriots, just like the FBI. There is no difference. And all of that is as a result of these wars that were creating the distraction, right? When they create these distractions, they come after our freedoms. Now, coming back to God's nation on earth, yeah, that's us, the USA. You have a lot of Christians, right? And that's what really bothers these people. Because why is it that Americans are against the Republic? They don't even like the fact that the USA was created in the first place. But they also think about pilgrims. They think about Christians. They can't stand it. And if you keep on arguing with these people, finally it will be a conversation about how they don't believe in God. Or in some cases, they do, but they're on the side of Satan. What can I tell you? And it's evil. And so when you look at these people, they want to do away with the Constitution because they don't even believe in the concept of what an American is, what the USA is. And so, of course, they're going after the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, even the prosecutions against Trump. It's not just about Trump. It's also about getting rid of freedoms and for the government to take over. But if you see all these Christians in your nation, then you get very nervous, right? Plus you have the Second Amendment. So now we're talking about a lot of Christians that are heavily armed, and that's why they're starting to go after Christians. And they're doing so with the IRS, DHS, the CIA, the FBI, the whole DOJ, in fact. And they're importing a lot of people to create a lot of problems for people on the ground. They're coming up with policies that are really anti-Christ, and they're designed to destroy the nuclear family and everything that made our nation great, because they don't even want our nation to exist. Instead, they're focusing on overseas countries, protecting them. But you realize that those things always come down to money, right? Massive money laundering, the Ukraine scam, a lot of people getting rich. But it's also the power. And It's age-old controversies and conflicts brought to the fore. In fact, if you look back in history, they look at Europe as being the Holy Roman Empire, and so the EU wants to be secular, antichrist, and again, they want to be totalitarian, so they cannot stand the fact that people look to God as the highest authority. In China, they have some Christians there, but China made a deal with the woke Pope, the fake Pope, right, who helped China to dilute Christianity in China. Also, they're not big on Islam, because when you have totalitarian regimes, they don't want Christians or people, respecting God, because then they cannot exert power. They cannot be God themselves, right? And they're always second fiddle. That's how they feel. They're tyrants. And so if you look at the left, in the past when they were spouting all their peace and love stuff, high on weed or whatnot, you realize that many of those people later in life just showed their true faces, and they're fascists. And it's not just those Hollywood types, Robert De Niro, Rob Reiner. It's just, in general, people that were leftist, they become fascist. Why? Because it's a fine line. If you already start off wanting government to solve all your problems and to become a slave to the government, then you also want government to start to silence your opponents, to throw opponents in jail. We are now a nation that is involved in international arms dealing, starting up wars and conflicts. We are prosecuting political opponents, the Biden regime is. And we have J6 prisoners that are tortured, and many more are being rounded up right now just for being anywhere near Washington, D.C. on that day, January the 6th, the Reichstag fire event, as I call it. And it was a setup, and now they're really trying to make it that if anything funny happens in November of 2024, no one will dare to go protest, so they can do whatever they want. They already know nobody's going to protest because they're not wanting to spend 2 decades in prison just for standing somewhere in Washington, D.C. And that is fascism. What we're seeing is fascism, massive censorship, all these government agencies going after the American people. And the main problem they have, it's not just patriotism, it's that we're Christians, and Christians with the Second Amendment. I mean, they are so scared. It's not a sign of confidence or security that they're doing that. They're doing it out of fear. They're attacking President Trump out of fear, and that's how evil is. Evil is cowardly, just like Hamas killing all these defenseless people, babies, children, and then right away they start calling for a ceasefire. That's how the devil operates, because in essence, evil is cowardly, and the devil is a coward. And that's why the power of light, the power of God, the power of respect and belief in God, in Christ, that scares them so much. And so I always say, if you're fighting against fascism, just make sure that you're fighting for God, and then country, then family. But also understand that fascism, it's a far left ideology. It's like communism, but with a twist. It's like Coca-Cola or Pepsi, right? It's basically the same thing, but they have their own gimmicks. But it's far left, big government totalitarianism. That's what it is. It's not far right. There is no such thing as far right. You will see that many of these people that the media calls far right are just normal, regular center-right people, right? Traditional values and Christian, for them, that's already far right. If you're a Christian and you're not into abortion and, like a bastardized version of Christianity, or a diluted form, then you're far right and you're a threat. They see you as a domestic enemy, and so does the FBI. Yeah. And that's how it works for those people. But they can go after children, they can groom, they can look the other way about rampant crime, and then they can throw the book at people who are exercising their First Amendment rights or Second Amendment rights. And what's the result? You see a lot of kangaroo courts, you see a lot of corrupt judges and prosecutors, and of course U.S. law is ignored. You have double tiers of justice. Even now, the game they're playing in Washington, D.C. with the GOP, they're really investigating Biden, but every week they're showing hard evidence, but they're not impeaching the guy. But I notice it's a pattern. Whenever these judges are attacking President Trump, and to avoid, people really getting too angry, they suddenly say, hey, look, we found this about Biden, and, there's fairness because we're also going after Biden. But at the same time, the GOP is pretty much looking away and ignoring the political prosecution and persecution of President Trump. In fact, the GOP would love it if President Trump disappears. And you have a lot of so-called conservative media people, some of them claiming to be big-time Trump supporters. And, I can name names, but F them, I don't even care. They are just waiting to take over a chunk of MAGA without Trump being there. They don't even like the fact that they have to talk about Trump, but they do it for followers and selling merch and whatnot. But you have a lot of people in the GOP, they want the movement, and they already start to call it the conservative movement. You know what I mean? It's like they don't want to say MAGA, they don't want to say America First. And you have people that do call it MAGA, but what they want is a MAGA without Trump, without all the Trump problems and lawfare, and they just want to grab a chunk, just like people did with the Tea Party. And the difference was the Tea Party didn't have a leader like MAGA has the MAGA king. So the Tea Party was ripped up into many pieces, and, they all got a chunk. And they built big empires like Glenn Beck, for example, and Bourbon Bannon. But if you look at MAGA now, of course, it's led by President Trump. All the ideas, all the policies, it's Agenda 47, it's President Trump, right? But they want MAGA for their own use. So some of them are bastardizing what America First means or what MAGA means. They're just filling in their own wish list. And that's why they prefer to have MAGA without Trump, so they can be more powerful. And in fact, all of these people make more money if there's like a Democrat president because of the outrage. And for years now, I saw that they never really post the statements by President Trump, who is posting on a daily basis. Even though these people are on Twitter, and with Musk it's more free, they're still not posting all the truth that he's posting, because, it's about them. They want to be the star, not having to be like a follower of the MAGA king. And of course they'll praise Trump and whatnot for the followers, right? Otherwise they would quickly disappear. But all of these people pretending to be all for Trump and criticizing DeSantis, they are actually very much like DeSantis. In the past, you thought this guy was all MAGA, right? Ron DeSantis, MAGA. But he ain't, and he wasn't, just a fake. Well, I'm telling you, many of these so-called Trump supporters in conservative media are all like DeSantis. You would never imagine that they could hate on Trump that much, but it's on the inside. And I am pretty good at detecting that stuff. And I'm always like way ahead of the curve, right? So I'm not making any friends, but I'm not here for that. I'm not a social media person. I'm not a YouTuber. I just do this like a side thing, just to be able to talk about politics. Because in real life, do you really go around talking to people about politics or, those kind of details? No, it's kind of weird, right? I can imagine being on a date with a girl. Yeah, did you know that the GOP is doing this and that? I mean, they would look at me and like, wow, checking their watch, wanting to leave. It's just one of those things, right? When you are out there in real life, you usually don't talk about those types of things, at least not in detail, maybe in general. And sometimes I don't want to be disappointed. I know some people don't like Trump, and sometimes if you mention Trump, their face will turn into a scowl just by hearing the name Trump. And many of them have been conditioned by the media. Some of them, of course, have no idea about the real Trump because they just look at CNN or whatnot. But I'm going to tell you something else, and I'm going back to that main subject, which is a common denominator. I see President Trump as a messenger from God. Because why is it that the president, the person that is worldwide and known to be a very tough guy, I mean, you go around the world, say Trump, they all think of a tough guy who's very strong as a U.S. president. It's also the U.S. president that kept the peace, didn't start new wars. That's not a coincidence. That's God's work. That's God's way. So he's a messenger from God. And that's why I believe when people have that Trump derangement syndrome, they start shaking when they see Trump or hear about Trump. It reminds me of that movie, The Omen, the original one, right? Where you have the little kid in the car and they're getting close to a church and the kid starts going crazy. He starts clawing at his mom's face and they had to turn the car back, right? Well, that's how people react to Trump sometimes, and sometimes it's mental illness. Maybe sometimes people take out their personal problems by picking like a straw man, and then it's President Trump, right? The hatred. And I feel in many cases it's because you have people that really don't like that he's representing many Christians, that he is protecting God's nation on earth, that he's a patriot, because for them, the USA, it's a Christian nation that shouldn't even exist. So when they see a mega patriot like the MAGA king, they start shaking with anger. It's like unhinged demons, and you can't deal with that in a normal way. Sometimes I see that as being above my pay grade. You need an exorcist or something. That's why I, don't want to deal with people that have Trump derangement syndrome so much, because it's obsessive. There's a stalking side to it, and I think there's a demonic side to it also. And I also feel people that are anti-Trump are not very good with God. Not in good standing. Also no respect for the highest authority at all. And so we have to unite and stick together. We're Christians, we're Americans, we're patriots, and we're God-fearing, real people, warriors. And they have the government, they have the media, but when it comes down to it, they fear us, and we should not fear them. You have to defeat fascism, and that's what we're dealing with. Call it communism if you wish, but the same people that are pushing for the Ukraine war, they're still calling Russia the Soviets. Yeah, decades after the Soviet Union ended, because some people think, okay, if we call them Soviets or communists, then we'll get more people on board with the money laundering scheme that is the Ukraine scam. So I don't like to use that word, communism, because in fact all of these people are looking out for the big bucks, the big profits, the big bribes. That's not communism. Colluding with big corporations and one-party government, that's what happened in the 1930s. And that's what we have. All those big corporations, they're colluding with the Democrat Party. All the government institutions are going after people that are not Democrats, that are Christians, conservatives, Trump supporters, even using the IRS for that purpose. And so we have to really look at all the censorship, the political prisoners, the persecution of President Trump, as being those signs that these people want to end our republic and start something very disgusting, totalitarian regime, open borders. I mean, we're talking about a globalist scheme to end the republic, the United States of America. And what will be in its place can only be something that is evil and destructive and apocalyptic. And of course, if you look at Israel or Ukraine or Russia, many of those things are distractions. Sometimes you have to just look at your surroundings, right? Is your family okay? Are your friends okay? And you start seeing that people are very upset. People want to do something. People want to unite. People want a better life. They don't want to live under the dark cloud of fascism and these God-hating atheists and a motley crew, if you will, of people that hate God, a riffraff. A collection of people that don't seem to have any happiness in their lives. Everything they always want and talk about is chaos, war, and, doing Frankenstein experiments and using big government power to make people do insane things, like we're a bunch of circus clowns or animals in experiment. But we're not. And that's why, when people start playing God, you're talking about the ultimate corruption of power, and a lot of sick things come to the fore. Like I said, if we don't have strong leadership and you don't respect the highest authority, then the devil goes on a rampage. And that is what you're seeing, and not just in our nation, across the world. The world will never be a beautiful place. Many bad things always happen. But you can really close down a lot of evil just by having strong leadership and having brilliant people in charge, like a very stable genius, President Donald J. Trump. And that's why they're attacking him. They have as much hatred for President Trump as they have for Jesus Christ, God. And you see it. And it's like their mortal enemy. They are waking up every day, wanting to battle against Christ and everything that Christ stands for, and his messengers, like President Trump and Trump supporters. So I can just tell you that, the best is yet to come. It's hard to believe in that, but you'll see that after a long while, victories will come often and quickly, because what we're seeing now is the kind of swan song of some of these people that are very old, and they are trying to go out with a bang, doing a wish list of evil to feel young again. It's like if you let a demon possess your body will not become old, but once a demon leaves your body, you will suddenly just fall apart, right? And it's disgusting. And you see these people, if the fuel for your life and what really makes you tick every day is evil, is chaos and war, then there's something really wrong with you. Maybe you already don't have a soul, and maybe it's because you're godless. And some people do have a moral compass, and they still go wrong, and that is because when you have a world that is very confusing and full of chaos, and that's what they're creating, then even people with a moral compass have a problem, because it's like a magnetic storm, right? Even your compass will go haywire. People also are weak, or they grow tired and just give up and give in. And that's why when we say never surrender and unite and fight, it makes a lot of sense. What also makes a lot of sense is that we're God's nation on earth. So putting America first is not only something that makes sense, it's our duty and obligation to God.